Good morning, students. Today we are going to learn about oral communication. Oral communication is a process of speaking and listening where a speaker and listener meet together to verbally transmit their ideas and information with each other. It is mainly a word of mouth communication where it is associated with non-verbal cues like gestures and postures. So, to put together, we can say oral communication is a method of communicating ideas and information from one person to another in verbal format. This can be done through face-to-face interaction, group discussion, telephone calls, and so many other formats which we are going to learn ahead. So, what are the characteristics of verbal communication? First, it is mostly verbal. We use verbal or word of mouth to communicate our ideas with each other. It is voice based. In verbal communication, we have two types, oral and written. Here we are talking about oral communication where we mostly use our voice to transmit our ideas and information. It can be done through different formats like we just spoke about, face-to-face interaction, telephone calls, web-based. There are so many other formats through which we can communicate. Varying size of participant. If we have to talk or speak or communicate with one person, then face-to-face communication or a telephone call is apt. Whereas if the size of our audience or listeners are more, then we have to go for mass media communication like television, radio and all. So depending on the size of our participants, size of our audience, we need to select which format or which form of oral communication we can opt for. Then it is very flexible. We can mold our communication style, we can mold our tone based on what is the understanding level of our listener, how they can perceive what we are saying and how we can persuade them. We can change our tone and language based on our audience because oral communication gives us the flexibility to change our method. Then it is a two-way interactive process. There are two people involved in oral communication. One is speaker, another one is listener. So in oral communication, having two people is very much necessary. That's only when two-way communication can happen. And the last is aided by technology. Nowadays, earlier it was face-to-face or group discussion can happen at one place, but now with the help of technology, it can be done through various methods like television, radio. So these are few of the characteristics of oral communication. If we have to keep in mind, mainly word of mouth and verbal communication is being done through this method. Now, why this oral communication is beneficial for us, or what are the advantages of having oral communication? First, it saves our time and money. It is a very fast process. As soon as a speaker speaks, the listener can get the information and give the feedback also. So it is saving the time, overall time of communication. It saves the money as well because now in face-to-face communication we don't need a lot of resources involved. And nowadays with telephone calls and web-based, the companies have reduced the cost so much that we are barely paying anything to communicate with each other. So it saves our time, we get instant feedback and we can send our message instantly and save our money as well. It facilitates better understanding because we can mold our tone, we can mold our information based on our listener. So it facilitates us to cater to the listener's need, that what the listener wants to understand and how he can understand. Based on that, we can change our information providing method. It helps in persuading effectively. In case of business communication, when mainly the salesperson or the business executive have to speak to clients, they have to persuade them, they need to negotiate with them. It happens when they can persuade effectively, and oral communication caters to that because they can change their way of messaging and persuading through oral communication using different tones and ways. It provides opportunity for clarification. if the listener is unable to comprehend to what the speaker is speaking, then there are chances that the speaker can mold the sentence and make it more clarified and easier way for the listener to understand. So it gives us the opportunity where we can rectify what we have said, or we can change the way how we are speaking based on what our listener wants to understand, based on their understanding levels. It creates social relationship. Oral communication facilitate developing social relationships. How it does that? Because when we speak to each other, we understand each other better, which is not possible in other way of communication. Because when we meet and when we speak to each other, we understand each other's personality, attitude, and it facilitates creating more social relationships, which is needed in any organization nowadays. It motivates people to act. If we have to motivate our employees, oral communication is the best way to do that, because we can understand our employees' issues and try to resolve it. We can motivate them through various methods, and we can cater to their needs so that they can produce, they can facilitate and give output based on what we are needing. It helps us meeting our organizational goals on time when we have motivated employees. It can be done when we are orally communicating with our employees. Then it helps learning things. To learn things better, we need to understand things better. So mainly in mass media communication or face-to-face communication, our understanding grows. So we learn things better when it's explained well, and explanation can be facilitated only through oral communication. In written communication, we cannot elaborate the things much or cannot make the things understandable by the listener, but in case of oral communication, we can do that very efficiently. So the listener can understand the things and learn the things faster and in a better way. It strengthens the cooperation and resolves conflicts. Whenever there is any conflict between the management employees or the employees within the organization, oral communication facilitates as the best source to resolve the conflict. Because as we speak and we talk about the problems, it is easier for us to resolve the conflict and get into a midway to solve it. So it happens when oral communication is facilitated. If in other forms of communication, it's very difficult to make others understand what you want and how it can be resolved. So all the conflicts can be done or can be rectified through oral communication. And it's appropriate for sharing confidential matter. It is one of the most advantageous thing when we want to share confidential matter within our organization. In organization, there are so many confidential matters which we discuss and we need to done, because we don't want our information to reach to our competitors. So when we are orally communicating, we are not documenting anything, whereas in other forms of communication, we are documenting what we are communicating. So in oral communication, we can conceal the information which we don't want to share with outsiders. So having a group discussion or a face-to-face communication facilitates us to keep our organizational business secrets intact. We are not sharing it with the competitors or outsiders so that it get leaked or it's going to put any damage to our organization. So in advantages, we have seen that oral communication is beneficial for us because it saves our time. It helps us in understanding the things better. It helps in persuading us the listeners effectively. It provides us the clarification opportunity. It creates the social responsibility. It helps us to motivate our employees. It helps us learn the things better. It strengthens the relationship in the organization, resolve the conflicts, and it is most apt way of keeping our confidential matter in concealed way. So now let's see that what are the disadvantages or problems we can face with oral communication. The first one, no record or evidence. As it is one of the benefits as well that it keeps our secret, but the demerit of keeping the secret that it is not documented anywhere. So if you have to refer back that what were the conclusion of the discussion or what you have thought of doing ahead, there is no record or evidence of it that this discussion or conversation ever happened. So no, because of not keeping any record or evidence, it becomes a very big demerit for the organization when they want to refer back and see what were the conclusion of particular discussion. And another demerit is effectiveness is situational. The effectiveness of oral communication depends on situation. Means if the crowd is too much, or the people are too many around, then having one to one discussion or one to one conversation is not possible. In case of a group discussion also, if the oral communication method picked is not apt, then there is no effectiveness of the communication. Mainly in oral communication, a big factor of noise disrupts the whole communication process. If there is a lot of noise around or distractions, then the feedback or the message delivered from the speaker to listener is not effective, and the message will not reach the listener effectively. So these are two big demerits of oral communication, and with proper methods or understanding the situation and proper documentation can heal these disadvantages and make oral communication even more effective. Now let's understand what are the different methods of oral communication. The first one is face-to-face communication. Face-to-face communication can happen when there are two or maximum three people involved and they are talking with each other and discussing a very crucial topic. So in that case, face-to-face conversation is helpful. Another method is telephone. Telephone, if the speaker and listener are not at one place, they are at a very far place or far from each other and they need to communicate with each other, then telephone is the most appropriate method of communicating. Next, it is voice over internet protocol. Voice over internet protocol are mainly used by the organizations to speak or reach to their customers. Voice over internet protocol, also known as VoIP, is an efficient way when you have to communicate to many people at the same time. Next, video telephony. Video telephony is the extended version of telephone where the speaker and listener are far away, but along with listening to each other, speaking to each other, they can see them in real time. You can see your speaker or speaker can see the listener as well as communicate through a video call. In nowadays, video telephony is also known as video call. Then radio. When you have to cater, when you have to speak to a large number of participant or listener at one time, then radio is one of the way where you can send your voice to millions of people at the same time. So mainly radio is used to send a message which needs to be sent to million of people at one go. Radio is the appropriate format, but it does not facilitate the video, only the audio part of the communication reaches to the listener. And the last one is mass media channels or the television, where along with audio, video also reaches to the listeners. There the listeners can listen as well as see what exactly the speaker wants to show or say. So from here we have seen that face-to-face communication, telephone, voice over internet protocol and video telephony provides us one-to-one conversation or communication, whereas radio and mass media channels helps us reach millions of people in one go. Now let's talk about the factors affecting oral communication. Means what are the factors or what are the reasons which may disrupt the communication process and act as a hindrance in the overall process of understanding and interpretation. The first one is status or role. In organizations, what happens is there is a manager and an employee. So if there is a status issue, that the manager is sending some message to the employee, but employee's understanding level is different and the manager's understanding level is different, what communication, what message reaches to them is different, then the oral communication between them may not be effective, because the status of manager or understanding of manager is different from how employee has to perform the task or how employee has to interpret it. So the status or the role of the person means the person, the speaker and the listener. If it is not same, mainly it can act as a hindrance. Next is cultural differences. Within an organization, multiple culture people meet together to work. Because of our cultural differences, because of our different culture and ethnicity, we have a different level of understanding developed. So if we are unaware of that, what is the particular meaning of someone speaking to you according to their culture, then it may not reach to us in an appropriate way. So cultural differences act as a big barrier when we want to communicate orally, because our linguistic structure and the other person linguistic structure may be very different and understanding level can be different. Next, the choice of communication channel, that what channel we are going to opt for a particular message. In previous topic, we have learned about different channels or different methods of communication. So based on our participant, based on their perception, based on their size, we need to find out which particular communication channel is going to be apt for them. So if we are not selecting a particular channel to interact with them, then the communication may be very different. For example, if we have to discuss a very confidential matter with only 4 or 5 management people and we are using radio or television there, then it may not reach to the person perfectly and we cannot get the feedback instantly as well. So it's not going to be the right choice of medium for communicating our message. So messages sent through inappropriate channels can send wrong signals and can cause confusion. We need to be very cautious about what type of method or media we are selecting for our communication. Next, length of communication. How much information we want to provide to our listener. If the message is very big, the length of our message is too high, then we need to opt for something which can be understandable by our listener at the time. We cannot go for a lengthy discussion through oral communication much, because the retention power of our listener is very limited. So, and they cannot retain all the information provided through oral communication in mind for a longer period of time. If the message is short, if the message is precise, then only our listener will be able to retain it in the minds. So it is responsibility of the sender or the speaker to find out that what is the length of the information or the message and how they are going to provide it. Because unless, we need a proper feedback from the listener as well. So if the message is not reaching them appropriately, we will not get the feedback appropriately. The next is use of language. There are so many languages and there are so many words which have different meanings as well. When we are communicating with a set of people, we need to keep in mind that our language should be familiar to them. We speaking in one language and the listener is unable to comprehend or understand that language, then that communication, that part will never be appropriate for the listener to understand. So it is essential that the language should be familiar with the receiver as well, what speaker is speaking. Also, the words which we are using should not be having multiple meanings, or the listener or receiver should be aware about the meaning of the word you are going to use. For example, if a technical person is using a sentence, please found me a mouse, then the technical person will be meaning a mouse which is used to operate a computer system, not the mouse which is an animal. So the receiver should be aware about the technical terms and the language which speaker is comprehending. So if the language is not clear, it's going to act as a barrier. Then the perception, attitude and personality of the speaker. So if the perception, or I mean the listener's perception, attitude, personalities are not matching, or how the perception of the listener is changing, it affects the communication process. What is the understanding level of the listener and what is the understanding level of speaker? Maybe both are correct in their own way, but the sentence said or the communication way provided may be confusing for the listener. For example, if someone is out of anger, is speaking something or instructing, and the other person or the listener is taking it as a rude behavior, it may send a very wrong message to the listener. So the perception also affects the overall communication process when we are opting for oral communication, because we are using our tone, our gestures and postures to communicate. Along with words, our non-verbal cues also plays the part, whereas in written communication the personality or the perception doesn't play a much huge role, because we are not using the tone or gestures there. But in case of oral communication, it plays the very vital role. So these are few factors which affects the overall communication process. And the last factor which affects our oral communication is if the receiver is known or unknown. If the receiver is known, they can understand the communication better because they know the speaker better. Okay, they are going to understand the message in a very familiar way because they have understood the perception and attitude which we discussed in the last point better, in a better way. So the communication becomes more efficient. But if your audience or your receiver is unknown about you, they don't know that what and how you communicate, then they need a lot of attention and more work on the listener. So speaker plays a very vital role here, understanding the listener whether they are known or unknown. If the listener is known, then they can concise the information based on the known audience. But where the audience is unknown, first the speaker need to understand that what type of audience they are going to get, and based on them they have to prepare the message. Mainly in case of lectures, seminars where the audience is very unknown, but you need to understand that what type of audience you are going to see there. In conferences and seminar, mainly a particular topic or particular subject area the people gather. So based on their understanding level, we need to create a message or draft our message. So to sum up the oral communication, we have seen that oral communication is a method or is a process where we are transmitting our idea in a verbal format by word of mouth, and we exchange our information, ideas within speaker and listener using our speaking and listening skills. Then we have spoke about what are the characteristics of oral communication, that it's mostly verbal, it is voice based, it happens through different formats, it depends on the large or small size of participant, mainly listeners, it is flexible way where we can change our way of talking, we can change our message understanding, and it is a two-way interactive process where two persons need to be there so that the process can happen. Sender sends the message, receiver or the listener receives the message, and the feedback happens. And it is aided by technology, by the disruption through technology. Now the method of communicating orally has also changed. So it has a lot of advantages. We can use oral communication because it is very much important, or it provides a lot of benefit to us. How? Because it saves our time, it helps us understand better, it helps us persuade our clients in a better way, then it clarifies, it helps us clarifying our doubts or clarify the problems which our audience are getting, so we can rectify the things in their way. Then it helps us creating the social responsibility, it motivates our employees and staff so that they can perform in efficient and effective way for organizational goals. It helps us learn the things better, mainly in training process. We can use different techniques so that the employees in our organization can understand things better and perform. Then it helps us resolve the conflicts and build our relationship in the organization much stronger. It is appropriate for keeping the confidential matter concealed, so it is not getting leaked to the outsiders or the competitors, and our information stays within the organization. Along with advantages, we have learnt about few disadvantages of oral communication. One of the biggest disadvantage was not having any record or evidence of the communication we happened, and it depends on situation, mainly how much noise is distracting the total communication process. So effectiveness is not always, it's situational. So these are two disadvantages we have learnt about oral communication. Apart from that, we have learnt about different methods or channels of oral communication, that is face-to-face interaction, telephonic communication, voice over internet protocol, video telephony, all being one-to-one communication process. Whereas if we have to reach the mass, then it is radio and television, which helps us cater to more people at one time. And in last, we have discussed about what are the barriers or factors affecting our oral communication, that is the status and role of employees within the organization, cultural differences between the people. Then we have seen that the choice of communication channel also act as one of the barrier. The length of the communication or length of the message, if we have to send a lot of message to the listener, then it's not going to be opt for having oral communication for hours, because the listener's retention time is very limited. So we have to pick the appropriate length or appropriate channel based on the length of our message. Then use of language, what language we are using, so that a listener can understand what we are speaking. Okay, the listener and speaker can have different languages spoken, so we need to understand that, and no technical words can be sent to the receiver because they might not be aware of those words. Then the perception, attitude and personality of the people involved in the conversation, that is speaker and listener, if their perceptions are different, their attitude is different, then they may not understand each other's message properly. And the last one is known and unknown receiver, which we have discussed. If the receiver is known, then message becomes more clear and in short, whereas if the receiver is unknown, then it becomes very difficult for the speaker to send the message to the receiver. So with this, we came to the end of the session. I hope you all have understood the part. Thank you.